I filmed these coyotes last week playing outside their den. The den was actually built literally in the town where I live in Colorado. So I was able to watch the coyotes and film them. And it was just a really special experience for me because I've seen adult coyotes many times in the wild, but I've never gotten to see pups before, least of all pups playing at their den. And these guys were so easy to observe and so easy to film. So I thought this would be a really good opportunity to kind of make a video about coyotes and why I think they're really cool, and also why I think they're really misunderstood and underappreciated creatures, especially in the United States where I live. So this was sort of highlighted recently in a really horrible way by a video of a guy named Aaron Snyder, who was the host of a hunting podcast called Born Primitive, torturing a coyote to death. Now, I'm not going to show footage of that video because, frankly, I show you guys enough disturbing footage on this channel already, and I don't think there's really much point. But I think this is really symptomatic of the attitude that a lot of people in the United States unfortunately have towards coyotes. And so I wanted to make a video to kind of show the other side of coyotes, show you why they're really cool and really interesting and deserving of compassion. So I thought this was a really good opportunity to make that video. So if you're new to my channel, my name is Dr. Mickey Pardo. I'm a biologist. I have a PhD in animal behavior from Cornell University, and I have over 16 years, going on 17 years now, of experience studying wild animals and studying animal behavior. And the videos that I make on this channel are mostly about animal behavior and specifically the science of animal cognition, like how animals think and feel, and also how that relates to how we treat animals and the scientific case for animal rights. So anyway, one of the things that I find really cool about coyotes is their family life. So like many other members of the dog family, coyotes often form monogamous pair bonds, and their family structure can be pretty variable around this. So sometimes it's just a mated pair and their pups, and then when the pups grow up, they kind of leave home and go off on their own. But sometimes they'll stick around and help raise younger generations of siblings. And so you can have big packs of coyotes, which is basically a big family of parents and multiple generations of siblings. You can have just a pair by themselves. Sometimes you just have an individual coyote who's a single parent, but usually they form pair bonds, and often these pair bonds will last for life. And there's a study that came out recently about the neuroscience of pair bonding in coyotes. And this study found that coyotes who had recently lost a partner had elevated levels of CRF receptors in the olfactory system of their brain. Now, what does that mean? So CRF stands for corticotropin-releasing factor, and it's a hormone that's involved in the body's stress response. But it's not just involved in the stress response, it's also involved in grief when you lose someone. So when mammals experience grief, CRF goes up, and this reduces oxytocin in the reward center of the brain. And this results in depressive behavior. And we know very, very little about the neurobiology of pair bonding in coyotes, but this study found that they have elevated levels of CRF in parts of their brain when they've lost a partner. And so this suggests that just like other mammals that form monogamous pair bonds, coyotes likely feel grief as well when they lose their partner. Another thing I find really interesting about coyotes is their play behavior. So as you can see in this footage, coyote pups play a lot. And one hypothesis is that play behavior helps them learn hunting skills, but actually one study, it was a pretty small study, but still, one study that looked at this in the 1970s actually found no evidence that that was the case. So they found that with, a small number of coyote pups that they followed, the amount of play behavior that they engaged in when they were young really had no relation to their hunting success later in life. So that's kind of interesting because it suggests that it's not just this like direct one-to-one correspondence between playing is learning to hunt. It may be something a bit more complicated than that. It could be that playing helps them develop their muscles. It could be that it helps them develop reflexes in general. It could be that it helps them form social bonds. It could be a lot of these things. It could be a combination of many factors. But what's interesting is that when coyotes play, just like dogs, and if you have dogs, I'm sure you've seen this a million times, when they're trying to get another dog to play with them, they do this play bow, where they kind of like put their forelegs on the ground and sort of lower their head. And that signals to the other dogs that they want to play, and that any behavior that follows is just play. It's not aggression. What's interesting about coyotes is that they do this even more than dogs do. And it's thought that the reason why may be because coyote pups are a little bit more aggressive with each other than dog puppies are with each other. And so they may need to use the play bow when they're playing more often in order to make it clear that the behavior they're engaging in is play and not aggression. But there's all sorts of interesting dynamics around their play. So for example, they're understandably reluctant to play with individuals who play too rough. And so coyote pups will kind of tone down their roughhousing, especially if they're playing with a smaller individual. And if somebody else is playing too rough with them, then they don't want to play with them in the future. So there's a lot of really interesting social dynamics around that. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, coyotes are one of the most persecuted animals in the United States. So in the US alone, every year, about 500,000 coyotes are shot, poisoned, or trapped. And most states in the US allow hunting coyotes year-round with no season, no bag limits, nothing. You can kill them during denning season when they have pups that are dependent on them. You can use almost any methods to kill them in a lot of places, including really painful methods like leg hold traps. And unfortunately, a lot of states also allow coyote killing contests. So these are contests where people will compete to see how many coyotes they can kill in a single day. And this sort of perpetuates this culture where people just see coyotes as vermin to be exterminated. They don't think about them as individuals. They don't give any thought to their internal lives. And what's interesting about this is that coyotes are extremely closely related to dogs, which people love, right? Like coyotes and dogs can actually interbreed and produce viable offspring. They're very, very similar animals. And their behavior is very similar in a lot of ways too. And yet we love dogs, but we treat coyotes like trash. And there's this sort of disconnect there when it comes to coyotes. People really hate them, and they don't realize how similar they are to the dogs they have at home who they love. Now, it's not just private citizens who are killing coyotes. The government takes an active role too. So remember that study that I talked about earlier about the neurobiology of pair bonding in coyotes. Now, the way that they were able to do this study is through a government agency called Wildlife Services. So Wildlife Services is part of the US Department of Agriculture, and they basically exist to get rid of so-called nuisance wildlife, which essentially means wildlife that farmers and ranchers find inconvenient. And they kill hundreds of thousands of native animals every year, including coyotes. And they have a research center in Utah where they take coyote pups whose parents they've killed, and they keep them there for scientists to use in experiments. And so the scientists who did this study basically took coyotes that the research center was going to kill anyway, and they looked at their brains after they were killed. And so that's how they were able to compare the brains of females who had recently lost a partner to females who had not recently lost a partner. Now, Wildlife Services kills many coyotes in lots of different ways, but one of the methods that they've used in the past is something called cyanide bombs or cyanide traps. So basically, these are spring-loaded devices that are baited, and they're designed to attract carnivores like coyotes. Basically, the animal bites onto it, and then they pull because they're trying to get the food off of it, and that triggers the spring mechanism, and then it sprays sodium cyanide powder into their mouth. And as soon as the sodium cyanide powder interacts with their saliva, it creates toxic cyanide gas, which kills them. It kills them in a really horrible way. The thing about these cyanide bombs is they're really indiscriminate. So they've killed thousands of domestic dogs, including people's pets. In 2017, there was a really high-profile case where a teenage boy was playing with his dog. He accidentally triggered one of these cyanide bombs. His dog died horribly, twitching on the ground as he was looking on helplessly, and he was almost killed himself. He had to go to the hospital and suffered a lot of long-term side effects. But, they pose a danger to children, they pose a danger to pets. And so in 2023, the Biden administration, specifically the Bureau of Land Management under the Biden administration, banned the use of cyanide bombs on public lands. Now, in April of this year, the Trump administration rescinded that ban. So now they're free for Wildlife Services to use again. And there is a bill that is in Congress called Canyon's Law, named after the boy who was poisoned by one of these things, that would permanently ban the use of cyanide bombs to kill wildlife on public lands. And so one thing that you can do to help, if you want to help coyotes and other wildlife, is call your elected representatives, call your congressmen, call your senators, and tell them you support Canyon's Law. Tell them to co-sponsor this legislation and make sure that cyanide bombs can never be used on public lands again. And another thing that you can do is email Leah Baker, who is currently the acting assistant director of resources and planning at the Bureau of Land Management. Basically, as far as I understand, she's the person who's kind of in charge of this decision, and tell her to put that ban on cyanide bombs back in place. And then finally, if you want to help coyotes, a great organization that you can donate to, I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I just know they're a nonprofit that does a lot to help coyotes, is Project Coyote. So they advocate for coyotes. They help protect coyotes. So if you want to help coyotes specifically, that's a great group to donate to. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this footage of these coyote pups that I filmed. Please go and contact your representatives, contact the Bureau of Land Management, advocate for coyotes, because God knows they need more people advocating for them. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you next time.